Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a video for my Game Week 3 review and also specifically my Game Week 4 and even Game Week 5 transfer plans, because I've sort of deviated with my strategy a little bit in terms of where I think my transfers will land. And part of that, of course, is influenced by some of the outcomes so far, but then also what we've seen in terms of, I think, how my team has been performing so far and what I can do with my plans. Now, in terms of Game Week 3, let's just quickly review there. I would say it was a fantastic week. This is obviously Fantasy Football Hub's sort of live rank feature, so you can see right now I am around 584,000 in the world, but I think that can change because there are some sort of final last-minute calculations. I'm probably around 580,000, all things being said. We didn't have Salah, we didn't have Palmer, and we had a relatively great week. Lewis did well, Trent did well, Henderson did well for a goalkeeper considering everyone practically lost their clean sheet except for Alisson. Saka did okay. Unfortunately, he was very hamstrung by the fact that there was the red card. I was very fortunate on the flip side, though, to benefit from that situation with João Pedro. Now, these things happen from time to time, right? If you guys remember Game Week 1, we captained Isak against it, or in a 10 versus 11 situation, and that happens. You have to sort of take the losses in FPL. I definitely did go for João Pedro on purpose to play over someone like Pedro Porro, just simply because I knew that I was betting against Arsenal defense anyway, so I wanted to take the opportunity to go for someone like João Pedro over Pedro Porro in a pretty tough away fixture. Now, I have to be honest too, Pedro Porro looked fantastic, and it's always going to be extremely hard to bench such a high-quality attacking player. If you look at, for example, Trent, his disallowed goal, Pedro Porro taking, I think, 7-8 shots in that match, it just shows you how high-quality some of the players that we have in our team are, and even when you're benching them, there's obviously going to be a big cost. Some people bench João Pedro, and I think that's totally justified. I just didn't have a team necessary to bench him. You could have argued that maybe I should have gone Pedro Porro, but I just thought it was close between João Pedro. I'm quite comfortable in his minutes. I always have been, and that's sort of my landing point. Now, for the team, a lot of people are going to look at the team immediately and say Bruno Fernandes is someone who absolutely has to leave the team. He's produced nothing so far. And I think my response to that is look at someone like Eze, who ultimately after 2 weeks has delivered a great performance like this from a very, very sort of low quality shot, right? In the sense that it was outside the box, a great finish, of course, but it wasn't like an extremely high XG chance. The reality is if you continuously build a lot of chances, and I think it was unrealistic for me at all to expect anything from Bruno versus Liverpool, but I also would probably say that most people's transfer target for Bruno a few weeks ago would have been someone like Diogo Jota. He didn't get anything in a great game that Liverpool played versus United. So things like that tend to happen. He didn't have any chances for United, for example, whereas someone like Sobo did, or someone like Luis Diaz had plenty of chances, and Salah clearly did too. So things like that do happen. With Bruno, I have to say the next two fixtures are very good for Bruno. I'm not expecting him to blank versus Southampton. That's hopefully a great game week for him to do something, right? If he doesn't, then we might have to reconsider whether he's going to be a transfer out in Game Week 5. But I think right now, because Game Weeks 4 and 5 actually look quite good for Bruno, and I'm still planning the wildcard 6 in mind, I just don't see him as a transfer out. He might drop in price, that is a reality, but you can also look at Eze this week as a good example of why you shouldn't necessarily transfer out a player who actually has good games in the future, especially when they have great tools and avenues towards FPL points. And I think Eze is a good example of that. Isak as well, right? Newcastle were actually extremely dull in this game, and to be honest, we were probably expecting more from Newcastle, but they ended up getting the win in a 2-1 victory. So yeah, a little bit fortunate for Newcastle, but you also have to say that ultimately the next fixture is also Wolves. It's not like a team like Wolves have looked very impressive so far on the defensive side of things, so you'd hope that someone like Isak can continue to do well. With players like Rodgers, who was my transfer out, I've got now 1.5 million in the bank, and that gives me a little bit of a cushion to sort of make whatever move I want. If there's an injury that props up during the international break, if there's any issues that come up in the international break, I also have a really strong bench as well for Game Week 4, so I'm not too worried. So I feel like I'm in a good position where this could really be the first week where I maybe roll my free transfer because I have no more issues. Henderson seemed fine, even though he had a little bit of a scare. Saka seems fine, of course. And that's that, right? I own Haaland right now, and I wanted to maybe jump in on the discussion of Haaland as well, because I think one thing that people really forget to realize, especially half of the game week in, is when Haaland plays and he scores a hat-trick, which is obviously way beyond my expectation, way beyond the usual expectation, way beyond the market expectation, that's fine. That these things happen. People do not perform exactly according to that. If someone's predicted to score 1.34 goals, they're not going to score 1.34 goals in a match. They could blank, they could score a hat-trick, and that's fine. That's just, sometimes you have positive outcomes, sometimes you have negative. This week we actually had something crazy, which is Salah also absolutely matching up to Haaland, just like Palmer did in the previous week. And these things do happen in football. So I just want to shout out that that's normal. And we have to sort of accept these circumstances in football, and that's okay. I don't think, for example, when I, for example, suggested a wildcard draft for Game Week 3, that having no Haaland wasn't a bad choice. If you see, it had players like Salah, players like Saka and Palmer, who would all have their chances. And I think that draft also would have scored a decent amount of points. So the reality with FPL is that there's not just one way to get points. Haaland is an amazing player, and I chose to start the game without him, but I've never really criticized a Haaland-less draft. So I think, yeah, we just need to be a little bit more measured in terms of how we react to outcomes. Someone like Salah and someone like Haaland will not continuously score at a sort of rate of around 10 to 12 points per game. That's just unrealistic. The fact that they've exceeded that already is crazy, and you shouldn't expect for these players to continuously play week to week like that. Or you need to also have the same sort of expectation for some of the other players who are perfectly capable of coming close. And that means players like Saka, players like Palmer. For now, though, I think, I'm happy with the team as it stands. The plan was wildcard 6. Now Arsenal actually have 2 tough fixtures. So I'm actually pretty happy with only having Saka in my team. And let's just quickly jump into the transfer plans. So now quickly shifting gears towards my transfer plans, let's quickly have a look at Game Week 4. This is the pick and rating feature on Fantasy Football Hub. So have a look at the link in description if you want to have sort of the ability to get some transfer suggestions, also the ability to just manage your team on the client, and without having to put any of your data in, you just ultimately select your team, put your team name in there, find your team, and then input the team, and then you can start managing. You can optimize things like finding the ideal captaincy and vice captaincy, which I've done this week, right? This is a great week for Haaland, also a great week for Eze. He's ultimately versus Leicester at home. So that's a great sort of run of fixtures for most of my players. Even with, let's say, someone like Bruno, who's been super dismaying, as I said, he's got Southampton away. The tricky decision for Game Week 4, in my opinion, for myself and my own team is, what do I do with the bench? I think I have an option here to either play maybe Konsa or Lewis. I really do love Lewis, though. I feel like one thing that I might say about models is that it takes time to adjust. Lewis is currently playing an absolutely ridiculous position within this Man City team. Now, the risk of Rico Lewis is always going to be what happens if they choose. What happens is always going to be what happens if Pep chooses to start someone like Stones ahead of him, maybe in a little bit more of a tougher fixture. But I feel like that tougher fixture is going to be Arsenal. And speaking to someone like Luke and you can find him on FPL Twitter, very renowned sort of Man City connoisseur, I would say, within the FPL space. His estimations are someone like Lewis can lose his position maybe within the Arsenal match if the preference is to not have the right back effectively playing within this sort of diamond of a structure. You have Stones effectively stepping into the midfield like he has before in a slightly tougher, maybe more physical game versus Arsenal and the sort of presence that they have around the pitch with the center backs, the bodies that they have, etc., etc. So that's an interesting point of view, but I think Brentford at home is one of those games where with Lewis playing so well, it's very hard to see him actually being benched once again. So I will take the chance to do so, but this is a week where it feels a little bit odd because I would say Konsa has a great fixture himself. He is versus a pretty hapless Everton team who have, however, scored 2 goals so far, right? Dominic Calvert-Lewin has gotten a goal and assist. He seems like he's actually getting along with his season finally, so that's an interesting sight, but Everton still collapsed in that game. I just always like backing a Man City player where I can, particularly when it's a home fixture, even though Brentford are probably going to be a much better team than Everton when we evaluate things like that. But Lewis, as I said, playing in such an attacking position, I do wonder if the models are a little bit more reluctant to sort of boost his points, because you need to also be fair to, circumstances like Lewis has ultimately been a right back in the past. It's not like he's been playing this sort of very, very advanced role at times where he's getting into consistently good goal scoring positions or even, assistive positions in the box like we saw in the previous match. Over the last 2 games, Rico Lewis has effectively averaged something like 0.4 to 0.5 XG per game, which is just mad. That's XG. You don't see that often with the defender, so it just shows you how impactful that can be, and it's hard to react to that in the short term. So I do think Lewis is just a crazy pick. My advice to someone who doesn't have Lewis is I still think it's very tricky to jump into Lewis unless you've got a wild card in the back pocket and you really, really need a defender anyways, and you want to take the risk of the potential upside of Rico Lewis. I still think there's going to be downsides though, because it's not like Man City are devoid of players that can actually sub him off. If you listen to Pep Guardiola's press conference after game week 3, you'll notice that he talks about how inevitably someone like Lewis will have to be rotated across the season. And even though someone like Walker, for example, played like 18 games in a row, you know, I'm not so sure if I can say Lewis is effectively ready yet to do so. And I still think that's a big sort of logical leap. And I took the risk to go Lewis a couple of weeks ago, but as I said, that was with the precondition that I thought Ipswich at home justified that. Brentford at home is a slightly tougher fixture. So was West Ham away. So I feel like do proceed with caution, but he's obviously the most interesting defender in the game right now, if we're being honest. Now, Dunk, I think, is a very easy play. It's Ipswich at home. Trent, same thing here. The early substitutions for Trent are a little bit annoying, but also it kind of locks in the clean sheet, so that's nice. I've been trying to watch Liverpool, you know, for the last 25 minutes of the game the last 2 weeks, slightly begging that they lose a clean sheet, but it hasn't happened. I'll still be waiting. In the midfield, though, we have Eze, who, as I said, just has a great fixture. Saka as well. It's Tottenham away. It's without Rice, which is obviously a little bit of a dampener. But I think one of the issues that I have with my team is I've got 1.5 billion in the bank. So the one transfer that I can make is something like maybe Saka to Palmer. But as you can see, based on the expected points projections on the right here, it's not a huge upgrade, just making that one free transfer. If anything, the week where that upgrade sort of happens is in the next week, right? In game week 5, where I can generally consider maybe going from Saka to Palmer or actually going from Saka to Son. And that will also depend on, you know, what happens with someone like Solanke. Is he back for game week 5? Because we'll get more information as well on whether we kind of like the positioning of Son. I stepped into FPL Chai's sort of game week 3 preview stream and we discussed Son. Son is someone who, in the center forward position, in my opinion, actually always gets more XG. I generally like that if I'm an FPL manager, compared to when he plays left wing and is a little bit more of an XA threat. So tentatively, of course, if Solanke's out, I feel like I'm a little bit more emboldened by the move to go towards Son. Now, if he's actually ready to play and Son is going to be basically permanently stuck at left wing, then I actually find that I'm going to struggle to make that Saka to Son move. But Palmer is still very, very interesting as a free transfer. What is scary, though, is Salah just looks incredible. So I think a lot of people are going to be looking at this situation here and just saying, why not find a route towards Salah with a hit? And I think that's potentially the case. But my issue right now is that I probably have to go out of 2 players to do so. I'd have to go out of Saka, and I'd also have to go out of Bruno. Going into Salah, I only have 7.3 million in the bank. And unfortunately, in my opinion, best player in the game that's below this sort of price point is Mbumo, but Mbumo has his 2 worst fixtures. So you'll see that even on this list here, 4.4 points and 4.9 expected points is really, really poor as a return. And I'm not sure it's necessarily worth a -4 because I feel like there wasn't enough of a gap between Saka and Salah to consider doing so. And the one benefit to that, though, is that I do get the Salah captaincy. So I get a little bit of the point swing on game week 5, and maybe, just maybe, that could be the turnaround that I need. But as I said, I'm losing a little bit of points here, just the 0.8 from, let's say, Bruno to Mbumo. And also, it really just depends on how I value someone like Saka in the previous fixture, right? So that was, I think, 6.6 points, something like that. So there is a bit of a swing here. And I think taking a hit right now isn't something that I've fully considered. I also have a little bit of time to sort of sit on this move, right? Mbumo is going to move towards 7.1 million, probably by 2:30 a.m. on the 2nd of September. I'm recording this right now, right after the Liverpool game has finished. And, you know, it might be the case that I still have that 0.2 million in the bank to sort of really consider whether I want to make that move when the time comes. And so that is a move that I'm generally considering. But if I don't go for Saka this week, then it's very probable that I just keep someone like Saka and keep someone like Bruno, and then I move on towards game week 5. With Isak, as you can see, with Wolves and Fulham for the next 2 games, I still think he's a very, very easy hold. I don't see him as a transfer out right now. It's also unfortunate that someone like Watkins hasn't looked great, but I feel like we're also lacking in a little bit of the budget forwards, because someone like Wood, who's been operating extremely well so far, I mean, he has poor fixtures on game weeks 4 and 5, so there aren't too many forward transfers within the landscape. So on game week 5, the big thing here, of course, is that Haaland and Saka don't have the greatest fixtures. We are seeing what seems to be a slightly better Haaland. And I think that's something that I can generally accept from watching the games, right? He still looks like a step up from the 23-24 Haaland, whatever that means to you guys. But what if we keep Haaland here in this situation? And then I just go, as I said, Saka to Son, Saka to Palmer. So that's probably my expected move. And that could be quite interesting, because if I go towards Palmer here, then I'm basically saying he's going to be my captain. Maybe Haaland's my captain here based on the expectations, but I'm not really sure if I'm going to captain Haaland versus Arsenal. I still respect them incredibly as a defense. Watching the Brighton game, for example, seeing them completely shut out Brighton until the red card, it really just feels like that they're still the best defense in town. I don't think I have changed my expectations on that. Now, Eze actually has a really good fixture, and United really, really look poor still. So he's actually an interesting option too, maybe as a captaincy option and a very rogue captaincy option. But definitely options of Palmer, even De Bruyne potentially. If, let's say, Foden, there's something really wrong with him. I'm not sure what the illness issue is, and Pep hasn't really explained it. But him or Son are the options that I'm thinking about right now as potential outlets from Saka, because clearly this is one where I'd stand to gain a lot by just simply moving out of Saka, and I think that could be quite interesting. So those are my sort of plans right now. I'd probably say that I'm a little bit keen on Son because I do like backing my home fixtures. It is 0.1 point less than Palmer, but we'll see. I do think that Brentford haven't looked particularly good on defense. I thought Southampton were very challenging for them and created a lot of chances. And I kind of like the idea that I'm backing Pedro Porro and Son in this situation, and I feel pretty comfortable doing so. One of the 50-50s on this week is probably going to be what I do with players like Dunk and Konsa, but I'm pretty happy with this team and actually just making the one free transfer here. And then what happens on game week 6 is that all I need to do is actually just make that wild card, which I think is totally fine. So that's sort of my plan. In this situation, of course, I would be keeping one free transfer. So technically, I would have rolled on game week 4. I would use one free transfer in game week 5. And then actually heading towards game week 6, I'll be wildcarding there. And then I'll have 2 free transfers when I come out of the wildcard on game week 7. The alternative is that I don't really back, let's say, going for Son or Palmer because Salah, had amazing points projection. So if I go to someone like Salah, then the potential for me to, let's say, use 2 free transfers instead and to go out of Haaland and then consider maybe someone like Solanke. Because if Solanke comes back on game week 5, I think he's very interesting. Another option is always going to be Watkins, but right now these early substitutions are really bugging me. So if I go for someone like Watkins, now this is a really good switch up in the fixture. Now, there is a huge loss in terms of the expected points between Haaland and Watkins, but as I said, I do feel really comfortable about how good Arsenal are as a defense. I'm not sure if 7.1 points is necessarily what I would say is my expectation. I could be wrong. I could be betting incorrectly against the AI here, but that's sort of my intuition. I feel like if I can get something like a fully fit Solanke on game week 5, and I feel like we'll get enough information from that based on him playing in game week 4, if he gets to play 90 minutes versus Brentford at home in game week 5, just like he did in game week 1, then that's actually me being able to capitalize on something very similar to Son, avoiding Arsenal with Haaland, and then actually being able to captain Mo Salah in this situation here in what seems to be actually one of his best fixtures. Because if you actually look at the general fixture run, I mean, Bournemouth at home is a really, really good fixture. So I'd be able to captain him, and then I can actually vice captain someone like maybe Solanke that week, but probably actually seems like the play here is actually captain Salah and then to vice captain Eze, and that's probably what I'll do in game week 5. So those are my rough transfer plans. Let me know what you guys think in terms of those moves, because I feel like, as I said, this season is one where I think we no longer need to absolutely dead end our teams. It really does depend on which premiums go absolutely nuclear. As I said, Salah and Haaland have been performing excessively well. If you look at, for example, even these sort of AI suggestions, you'll see that players like Salah and Haaland are ultimately expected to score between 7 to 8 points per match. So the fact that they've consistently averaged more than 12, 13 points is just a bit of an aberration. You just can't use that as a point of logic to say you've got to go to these players immediately. And that's sort of my thoughts right now on FPL. Thank you guys so much for watching, as I said before. If you guys would like to subscribe to the channel, that'd be highly appreciated. I'll see you guys more for content in the international break. I will bring back the What We Have Learned series with a little bit of sort of early information on the season. Hopefully we get to reflect on the first 3 game weeks and see how teams have moved from the team strength of last year. Maybe we can also see how some of the team models created by some of my friends, like an 11FI, will sort of evaluate the future landscape, or how we're evaluating some of these sort of promoted teams and how they've been performing so far. But otherwise, take care and goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon. Enjoy the international break.